Gather now by standards, by swords, come unite the scattered hordes. By order, hobgoblins will reclaim the world that goblins fled in shame.
Verses from a traditional hobgoblin creation myth. Hi, I'm Jimmy, the local game master. I got away on a trip and figured I would spend a lot of time putting together this particular video since it was a long time coming. So let's begin. In the conception of the game, hobgoblins appeared not as exotic strangers, but as the inevitable escalation of the goblin threat. A larger, sterner cousin whose discipline turned petty raids into organized war. Their first entry hails from the white box D&D set by Arneson and Gygax, and it was simple and clean, but sent a powerful punch for the future. These monsters are large and fearless goblins, and we'll get to see what that means. Those first portrayals, echoed and refined through AD&D's Monstrous Compendia and the 2E Monstrous Manual, established several pillars that never really changed. Hobgoblins formed companies and warbands rather than mere mobs. They kept discipline, they obeyed, and their leaders, hard-bitten captains and cunning sergeants, enforced order with ruthless efficiency. Visually, older art often leaned into reddish to russet skin tones and the occasional distinctive red or blue nose, hair worn dark and long, armor practical and uniform by the standards of the goblinoid world. You can already see the thesis of this species is those early lines. Hobgoblins are not simply bigger goblins. They are goblins with a doctrine. As Forgotten Realms material began mapping where the people of Faerun make their war and homes, hobgoblins found obvious ecological niches, border marches where caravans are fat with goods, and mountain skirts where fortified camps can anchor a campaign. Races of Faerun and later 3E era lore place hobgoblin pressure along trade arteries and in rugged country near human realms such as Cormyr or the Moonsea's fractious city-states. Even there, though, the consistent through line remains the same as those first monster manual paragraph: discipline, formation, and conquest. Across editions prior to the newest retelling, the image of the hobgoblin only grows sharper. They are lean and tall, often around 6.5 feet and roughly 200 pounds. Built more like a long-muscled fencer than a hulking brute, their movement is unsettlingly quiet, especially for their size, a legacy of goblin kinship and relentless training. Rules text over the year has reflected this with natural stealth aptitude and a tendency towards dark vision that turns night and tunnel into familiar ground. Eyes are often described as yellow gold or amber, seeming to catch light in a way that suggests a predator's focus. Hobgoblin skin tones range from crimson orange to russet and brick, and their hair, when worn long, is braided and beaded with bone, often the remains of slain foes. Their tattoos are not inked decorations, but scarifications, brands and ritual marks cut deep to prove endurance and signal status. Likewise, piercings favor pain over ornament. Even their armor reflects the thesis: salvaged plates and leathers rebuilt with obsessive care into a seamless suit, polished and maintained until it passes inspection. This recycled tradition isn't shabbiness, it's craft doctrine. In the same breath that Volo's Guide to Monsters calls out their battlefield unity, realm-adjacent treatments talk about hobgoblin crafters as masters of repair and refit, turning captured kit into uniform gear. Culturally, pre-latest sources paint hobgoblins as hierarchical, punitive, and relentlessly practical. From childhood, they're taught ideas that feel like a drill manual turned into a religion. Self-control, formation discipline, duty over affection, victory over sentiment. One of the most potent cultural concepts circulating in edition-era articles that dig into the behavior is the personal perimeter. Every hobgoblin maintains a vigilant mental and physical boundary, always aware of threats and angles. always ready to reinforce or expand the line. When hobgoblins gather, those perimeters interlock. A squad becomes a wall. A warband becomes a fortress in motion. It's why they don't drink to stupor when their backs to windows, why they choose dark corners with eyes on exits, why their first instinct is a new place to fortify. This creed bleeds into everything. Mercy and compassion are condemned as mental clutter, acceptable only when they strengthen the tribe's long-term survival. Individual liberty is a dangerous distraction. Death in battle is not glorious. It is the mark of a perimeter broken. Though those who fall are honored for the strength they spend. The ideal hobgoblin dies usefully, often in a deliberate act that benefits the tribe or secures some form of advantage for those who remain. In sum, taking everything up to the threshold of the newest reinterpretation, hobgoblins are predatory strategists whose bodies, gear, and rituals have been tuned to the mathematics of conquest. A hobgoblin's frame is deceptive. Spare, long-corded muscle, low body fat, high stamina. They run lean because their lives are built around march, drill, and raid, not feasts. That leanness gives them a cat-like economy of motion, the minimal sound of boot falls, the habit of shifting weight silently before a strike. Their eyes, typically yellow or darker, are adapted to a low-light environment. In rules terms, this has usually appeared as dark vision. The sensory picture of result is a creature who reads rooms quickly, exits, choke points, fields of fire are all known. The hobgoblin's skin tends towards crimson orange through brick red, though occasionally darker, earthier tones are not unusual. Their hair runs black to brown to iron gray, often worn long and braided, and commonly adorned with bone, a practice with less to do with a vanity and more to do with a memorialize of victories. The nose is sometimes described as prominent and ruddy, with older art nodding to red or blue coloration, which is an aesthetic that marks up and crops up enough in legacy depictions to be part of the cultural memory around them. They treat the body as a ledger of pain endured. Scarification tattoos score rank, deeds, and thresholds survived. Piercings are driven deep, meant to ache, meant to remind. Where some cultures decorate to beautify, hobgoblins engrave to harden. Their trophies, from teeth to tiny phalanges, are drilled and threaded into braids or gear. To non-hobgoblin eyes, this reads as savage, but to them it is record-keeping that the whole tribe can read at a glance. The hobgoblin diet is mostly omnivorous, with a clear preference for meat. Their mobile, campaign-driven lifestyle leaves little room for traditional agriculture, so most of their food comes from raids, hunting, and commandeered herds. Many tribes keep small livestock strings, an emergency pantry more than a full economy though. And the largest war host will enslave or conscript subject peoples to till fields in captured territory. When they do settle in for a season of campaigning, you'll find drying racks for meat, smoke pits, and strict rationing overseen by labor caste quartermasters who will treat calories the way a captain treats soldiers, assigned and accounted for. Hobgoblin reproduction is policy, not romance. Pairings are often arranged among elite warriors, crafters, and priests with the explicit goal of breeding for advantage. Bonds of affection aren't forbidden so much as they are suspect, a potential fault line in the perimeter. Children are not raised by nuclear families, they are taken in hand by instructors from the religious caste and trained communally. This is not neglect though, it is programming. From speech onward, a hobgoblin's education is the careful installation of discipline, vigilance, and obedience. Each child is taught the personal perimeter early, first as a game of guard your circle, then as a meditation on breath and threat awareness, and finally as a combat doctrine. Your perimeter is your life, your squad's life, your tribe's life. Guard it, expand it. Emotional austerity is praised. Tears are not proof of feeling, but of leaks that must be sealed. Those who thrive under this regimen are streamed, military, labor, or religious, based not on preference, but on aptitude or tribal need. Before taking up permanent roles, military service is standard, giving every adult at least a soldier's schooling. Because their culture valorizes endurance, hobgoblins cultivate a high pain tolerance that reads almost ritualized. Scarification ceremonies are not only about the marks, they're about the breath control, focus, and public fact of not crying out. You can see echoes of this in their field medicine. Sutures done without complaint, burns dressed briskly, a meaningful phrase of approval, held your line, given more freely to the wounded who kept formation than to those who fought brilliantly but broke rank. Illness is treated pragmatically. A warrior with fever guards the gate rather than marches. A craft person with a strained wrist shifts to oversight. Nothing amongst their peoples can be allowed to waste if it can be repurposed. Of course, hobgoblins are justly feared for their reclamation craft. They salvage captured armor, re-rivet plates, stitch leathers, and polish everything to uniform sheen. What on day one is a mismatched stack of spoils becomes by week's end a coherent kit that looks like a minted for a regiment. They treat equipment the way that they treat soldiers, with inspection, maintenance, and punishment is equal measure. A warrior caught with dirty mail or nicked blade receives discipline the same way a soldier who misses a watch change does, because poorly kept gear can break the perimeter. So we'll sometimes talk about their combination of some of these cultural industry versus some of the other thing like hobbies and the like, but it all seems to blend together well. So when you look at something like the crafting done by hobgoblins, you might see drums and the crafting of sound. Hobgoblin war drums, the deep-voiced harun-dums, and tighter steel drums with small talking drums, the padooms, for signal, are celebrated objects. Battalions practice to their rhythms. Long marches are paced by call and response, cadences that double as code, and in some sources those drums are enchanted, a realism in fantasy terms, given how central morale of timing are to hobgoblin victories. Now, if you want to know where hobgoblins will appear, look for the edges. The edge of a kingdom where patrols are thinned, the edge of mountain ranges where the caravans yawn, the edge of the trade road where tax collectors grow complacent. There, hobgoblins establish base camps, usually within a defensible feature, like a ruin, a cave system, or abandoned keep. Then they begin the engineering. Ditches and ramparts, felled trees, rerouted streams into moats, a ring of outposts on a few miles out. Scouts push beyond the line, not to skirmish, but to map time and weigh out some of the decisions to be made. Once the perimeter is secure and the supply chain established, that's when the raids begin. An agricultural district can be stripped bare within a couple of weeks, not only of grain or livestock, but of iron, hides, beasts of burden, even tools and materials that can be refit for war use. Now, when we finish some of the ideas of talking about the ecology too, we have to understand that between each of the editions, the numbers kind of vary of the age of them, but the cultural picture is stable. The youth is brief, the prime is long for hobgoblins, and hard used, that's for certain. When strength and reflex falter, it is expected to transmute into instruction, craft, or counsel. A hobgoblin who can no longer serve in any capacity isn't shunted aside so much as given a choice. In many tribes, a final service that redounds to the tribe's advantage is considered fitting. It is grim, but it is consistent with the rest of their system. A noble sacrifice in a way. When hobgoblins are encountered outside their own territory, they'll often avoid exposure. They do not sit with their backs to doors, they limit drink, they watch windows, and in mixed company settings, they generally are pretty abrasive. Paranoia reads as an insult, discipline as contempt. But there's a reason the best human captains hire them despite their social friction. They show up on time, in order, with serviceable gear, and they hold the line. If any goblinoid is going to deliver a contract on the field, it's usually hobgoblins, a pragmatic note that runs right alongside all the darker ones. And the important factor is this ecology mirrors their ideology. This is the crucial synthesis for teaching. Every biological and practical habit you've just heard reinforces the doctrine. The lean build supports long campaign endurance, dark vision and stealth training support night raids and cave wars, scarification and piercing train their warriors to master pain before pain masters themselves. Communal upbringing removes family bias and replaces it with a tribal program. Recycling and maintenance ensures that material weakness doesn't crack a tactical strength. Ecology isn't separate from culture in hobgoblins. It's the bone and sinew of the same animal, a species engineered by belief to make war work. So let's move a little further. If goblins are flighty opportunists and bugbears are lurking predators, hobgoblins are the steel discipline of goblin kind. Their physiology is not built on impulses or appetites, but on the concept of the perimeter, a metaphor and doctrine that guides their every action. Each hobgoblin learns from the time they can walk that they have a personal perimeter, an invisible boundary of vigilance and control. To breach it is a shame, to hold it is survival. When one hobgoblin holds a line, two hold a wall, and a tribe together can hold a fortress. This isn't a metaphor in their minds. It is the literal structure of their thought. From this flows their distinctive mindset. Hobgoblins are always on guard, their eyes scanning for tactical weakness. They never sit with their backs to open doors, they don't drink to excess, and they prefer vantage points with full sight of a room. What looks like paranoia to outsiders is, to them, basic discipline. Emotions in their culture are considered potential sabotage. Compassion, love, or mercy are suspect, tolerated only when they make the tribe stronger. Where a dwarf might prize family or an elf values beauty, a hobgoblin honors only discipline, vigilance, and victory. Mercy clouds judgment. Compassion undermines unity. To falter in formation is worse than to fall dead. This is why even death is reframed in their minds. For many warlike peoples, dying in combat is glorious. For hobgoblins, it is failure, proof that one's perimeter broke. Still, fallen warriors are respected for their service, and the tribe honors them with practical reverence. But the ideal hobgoblin death is chosen, a ritual sacrifice, a suicide that buys time or power, an act that strengthens the tribe's perimeter, even in passing. Hobgoblin culture is built like a garrison. Survival is the paramount goal, and survival is guaranteed only by conquest and vigilance. Their society is divided into three main castes. The military caste is the largest and composed of warriors and commanders, fighters, rogue scouts, all drilled into formation. Leaders here are seasoned, often multi-classed warriors with cunning minds. Warlords emerge from this caste, chosen not for brute force, but for their ability to hold, maneuver, and expand the perimeter. The next is the laborer. The heart of the tribe, really. Often overlooked by outsiders, the crafters, armorers, and workers who ensure the tribe is fed, armed, and clothed. They are treated with respect equal to the soldiers, for without them the perimeter crumbles. Most have some military training and can be called to arms when needed. And the last is the religious. The smallest but most influential. Priests, adepts, assassins, and rare spellcasters form this caste. They serve as teachers of the young, enforcers of doctrine, and keepers of the tribe's spiritual focus. Though the military caste produces leaders, the religious caste can overrule when they need. In practice, they function as the governing council, ensuring every hobgoblin remains true to the philosophy of discipline and war. A hobgoblin's caste is assigned, not by preference, but by aptitude and need. Children are assessed as they grow, instructors decide who will serve where. All undergo a period of military training before settling into their role, so that every adult can hold their spear and march in line. Which conveniently works really well when you only have so many stats for these creatures. From birth, hobgoblins are raised in communal barracks, overseen by the religious caste. Their early lessons are games of guarding perimeters, like we've talked about, drills in silence, endurance, and watchfulness. By adolescence, they've already learned to see themselves as part of a larger whole. The training is harsh. Discipline is enforced by abuse as much as instruction. Pain is a tool to sharpen focus, and a hobgoblin youth learns that distraction, compassion, or individual indulgence can endanger the tribe. Combat training is their only permitted outlet of emotion, and by the time they reach adulthood, they are soldiers in thought as much as body. And hobgoblins are masters of reclamation and repair. Where goblins scavenge and wear rust, hobgoblins refit and polish. Salvaged armor becomes a uniform suit under the craftsman's hand. Mismatched weapons are reforged into blades that gleam. Their warriors march with equipment that looks professional, because anything less would be dishonoring the tribe. Now, the hobgoblin tribes rarely stay in one place long. Their parasitic survival style kind of strips the land of resources like locusts as they move on. You might see ideas of this in like movies like The Lord of the Rings, where you'll see how the Uruk-hai will strip the lands. They prefer to build fortified camps in defensible locations like ruins, caves, or captured strongholds. Then they dig trenches, fell trees, and redirect streams into moats, and so you can see why this might destroy the land around them. Now, once established, they send out the scouts and begin raids. Their primary target is agrarian settlements. It's easy food, poorly defended people, and resources are ripe for the taking. Their attacks are swift, overwhelming, and leave nothing behind. When one region is drained, they move on to the next one, taking whatever food, weapons, captives, and whatever else resources they can for their next campaign. Now, when we get to the idea of the social bonds that the hobgoblins keep, individual liberty has no meaning to them. Hobgoblins don't marry, they don't form families in a way that humans or dwarves do. Pairings are made for breeding, like we talked about. Children are raised by instructors, and one's true family is the tribe itself. Personal bonds can exist, but they are always subordinate to the discipline. A hobgoblin who puts affection above formation isn't considered a hobgoblin to all hobgoblins. It's dangerous to their formation. Honor within the tribe is earned not only by victory in battle, but by upholding the contributions of others and meeting what the goblins need. A warrior who disrespects the labor caste is guilty of breaking unity. Repeated neglect can result in exile. To hobgoblins, survival depends on every caste doing its part, and the perimeter cannot be held if arrogance undermines it. So, when we want to talk about the social interactions of goblins, if you want to understand hobgoblins in practice, you kind of have to look at their interactions on the battlefield and with others. So, hobgoblins never fight as a mob. They fight as an army. That's just a mindset that we should keep going forward. When they establish a new base, we know their first priority is fortification. They create layered defenses, moats, trenches, barricades, and outer rings and watch posts. And they slowly work their way out once they've set everything up. But they need to study the terrain, the enemy they're planning on fighting, and only once the field is prepared for them, that's when the raids can begin. And on the battlefield, hobgoblins exploit terrain ruthlessly. They seize high ground, ambush from cover, and choke enemies in narrow passages. Their lines are disciplined, their shield walls are tight, and their archers are placed with purpose. Reserve units hold back, tasked with disrupting enemies. Spellcasters are covering retreats with precision fire. Unlike goblins who thrive in chaos, hobgoblins thrive in order and planning. Their adepts and priests support their ranks with spells, buffing strength, healing wounds, or demoralizing enemies with fire and lightning. Every warband is a machine. Infantry hold, cavalry strike, casters disrupt, reserves protect. Once their perimeter is established, breaking it is a nightmare of attrition. When we take a look at the allies of hobgoblins, they are pragmatic. They use others more as tools when useful. So some of the following tools for them would be as follows. The goblins are often absorbed as expendable infantry, thrown at enemies to weaken defenses or overwhelm with numbers. Bugbears are valued as kind of shock troops, sometimes even given command roles, but more often just muscle. And we've learned about them already before with their sneaky nature. They can be rather helpful. Wargs are bred as sentinels and mounts, respected and well treated amongst hobgoblins, making them loyal companions. Now, bar guests are perhaps the most dangerous allies, often rising to leadership roles and pushing tribes towards darker, more violent paths. Now, I don't want to say bar guests are a variant hobgoblin, but they have a unique ability to shapeshift into a hobgoblin, which makes them rather interesting. I'll make sure to include a picture of them up here so that you could see them. Bladelings are mercenary outsiders. They're rare but prized additions. Their razor storms make them ideal for breaking lines. And then Formians are strange insectoid expansionists, sometimes form temporary alliances when they have mutual goals. But they often, more often than anything, clash, which makes sense. Of course, for as many tools as you might also have some enemies. Hobgoblins kind of see all outsiders as potential resources, except rival hobgoblin tribes. Other humanoids can be conquered, enslaved, or employed, but another tribe is always a threat to survival, competing for the same resources. Such encounters almost always end in brutal battles, with the weaker tribe destroyed or absorbed. Only the most charismatic leaders, often blackguards or Barghest-led champions, can unite multiple tribes into a true army. So let's draw into a little bit of religious connections. For hobgoblins, religion is not about comfort or mercy. It's about order, war, and survival. Their faith reflects their ethos, unyielding, militaristic, and focused on conquest. The chief figure is, of course, Maglobayet, the great conqueror and master of goblin kind. Hobgoblins see themselves as his chosen, the disciplined arm of his will. To them, Maglobayet embodies the relentless order of battle and the eternal war against all who would oppose goblin kind. While goblins cry out to him for deliverance and bugbears stalk in his name with brutal strength, hobgoblins imagine themselves as his generals, the ones who bring order to chaos and command legions in his eternal campaigns. Alongside Maglobayet, hobgoblins revere deities such as Namagaya, the patron of war and authority who embodies the iron discipline of hobgoblin command, and Bargravyek, one of the lesser gods of duty and cooperation, invoked to maintain unity between castes and tribes. In the Forgotten Realms, where deities often take many aspects, hobgoblins interpret these powers as voices of discipline, reminding them that each soldier is only as strong as the line they hold. Worship is rarely elaborate. Hobgoblin shrines are austere, piles of arms, banners, and enemy skulls rather than ornate temples. Priests wear armor and train as warriors. In their rites, sacrifices common, captives, beasts, or even failing members of the tribe are offered to Maglobayet to keep the tribe strong. In this way, religion and pragmatism kind of blur. Faith is not abstract, it is a weapon to forge unity and fear. The religious caste does more than pray, though. They are teachers of the young, indoctrinating new generations in philosophy of the personal perimeter. They are the counselors, who ensure the tribe's will remains aligned with Maglobayet's. And they're also the judges, whose decree can override even the warlord if survival is at stake. A hobgoblin tribe that loses its priest may still fight well, but it soon loses its cohesion, because the faith is what binds the doctrine in the marrow of every soldier. Now, there's different types of hobgoblins, and this will get into a really weird category of we have hobgoblins that exist that may not necessarily look different, but they might have decently different stat blocks or different fighting styles, so I want to explore some of those options. So you have hobgoblin leaders, and from the earliest days, hobgoblin warlords and captains have kind of stood out as dangerous foes. Unlike orc chieftains who rule by brute dominance, hobgoblin leaders rise by a combination of cunning, discipline, and tactical acumen. Many blend fighter and rogue skills, commanding through both fear and brilliance on the battlefield. Now, hobgoblin devastators are somewhat introduced in later lore with the Academy of Devastation, where hobgoblins train battle mages to act as living artillery. These spellcasters are taught only destructive and tactical magic, fire to burn, lightning to scatter, wall of force to fortify, and their spells are drilled into them with the same rigor of sword drills. A hobgoblin devastator is not a scholar, they're just a brute weapon of magic. And we have the Hobgoblin Iron Shadows. So these are a darker tradition that is the Iron Shadow. Hobgoblins trained in stealth, assassination, and shadow magic. They serve as secret police and covert operatives masked in devilish visages used to root out sedition within the tribe or sabotage enemies before the battle begins. Their presence ensures discipline remains absolute, for everyone knows that the shadow is watching. Hobgoblins are found from the Dragonspine Mountains to the Moonsea north, from Thesk to the borders of Cormyr. Some tribes adapt to forests, become stealthier hunters. Others in the mountains grow hardier, mastering sieges and tunnel warfare. In Karatur, eastern hobgoblins appear in the Monstrous Compendium, showing that Maglobayet reaches extend that far in Faerun. But we're not looking at too many different types of creatures, though. It is still all the hobgoblin. And when we kind of look at, if any form of variant, we can look at the ally, the Barghest. The tribes are often reshaped into darker, more ruthless forms, especially when they're led by a Barghest. And by what that means is that the Barghest, it will go to any lengths to strengthen the perimeter, which would mean allying with more dangerous creatures, which just kind of can lose the uniformity of the hobgoblin tribe. So before I get to the ending point of this video, I want to include some fun facts that I just kind of learned along the way. Maybe it's touching up on some of the stuff we talked about, but I just want to address some of them. So one, obviously tattoos and piercings. They're kind of a badge of endurance, not decoration. So each scar a hobgoblin wears is more of a proof of pain mastered. Another one is hobgoblins do not like to drink. They think drunkenness is dishonor, and they like to stay vigilant. Moving forward, another one I want to expand upon is how they are used as mercenaries. So the Zhentarim lords, I believe, are a very popular one that like to use hired hobgoblins for their companies because they are very disciplined. And lastly, the hobgoblin names. They're usually very long formal names that include their tribe, their parentage, and their role in that tribe. So in the human lands, exiles and mercenaries shorten them, but amongst their tribe, they'll have generally a pretty long name, which I imagine they can still abbreviate. So our most recent depiction of the hobgoblin in 2024 5e D&D in the Monster Manual is, as far as the art goes, in my humble opinion, is a absolute masterpiece. You can't sway me to change my mind on that. I think the art shown is absolutely beautiful, showing the hobgoblin warriors organized in a march, being led and keeping formation. I think it is beautiful, and it is a stunning piece of art for the hobgoblin. So let's focus on the description now. Hobgoblins embody the primal urge to grow and spread, expressing such drives by bending the world to their whims. Lone hobgoblins claim woodland territories and plunder the wilds. In groups, they form hierarchical, martial societies bent on conquering the land and stripping them of resources to serve their expansionist zeal. Hobgoblins often subjugate animals, monsters, and destructive fae, particularly goblins and bugbears, to serve their plans. Hobgoblins might ally with dragons, warlords, and servants of warlike gods, or other powerful creatures that promise the control of new territories. And should hobgoblins bring an entire land to heal, they seek out new conquests, venturing across seas into the Underdark or to stars of planes of existence beyond. Many hobgoblins serve the violent god Maglobayet, whose hunger to conquest matches their own. Hobgoblin followers of Maglobayet flourish in the infinite battlefield of Acheron, where they endlessly indulge their drive for domination. These war-obsessed hobgoblins employ elaborate tactics and strange weapons, which they sometimes unleash on worlds of the material plane. In all honesty, I didn't know what to expect when reading this. The hobgoblin being fey is fine, similar to the goblin. We talked about this before. I want it to be explored more, maybe. Something regarding why or how Maglabayet stole the goblinoids to begin with. And an interesting quote left out I wanted to mention was their tagline, which is "They're conquerors of all horizons," which really makes hobgoblins feel like the perfect eternal threat. Having 4 unique stat blocks was also an additional inclusion that I like to see. And just some final closing thoughts. There's probably some things I could have covered more in this video despite its probably long run time here, but a lot of the ties between hobgoblins are shared with goblins and bugbears and have already been covered a lot in those previous videos as well. So if you haven't checked those ones out, I really want to encourage you to do that. Hobgoblins themselves are probably the strongest willed of all of the goblinoid creatures, and getting to see them really fleshed out and knowing that there was such a tapestry of lore for them that already existed, it was pretty great. I probably could have gone into a lot more detail onto some of the specific natures of where some of this material was being drawn from, and a lot of it is from the Hobgoblin's Ecology, which was covered in one of the Dragon magazines. That is where a lot of this stuff comes from, but it was really great to pull all of this together and hopefully what could be a fun video. So in closing, hobgoblins stand apart from the chaotic hordes they are so often lumped in with. They're not the wild raiders or savage marauders. They're the soldiers, ruthless, disciplined, and endlessly patient. Their every scar, every drumbeat, every scarified banner is a reminder of the creed they live by. Survival through conquest, order through vigilance, unity through discipline. In the Forgotten Realms, they have warred against Cormyr, plagued the Moonsea, marched beside Zhentarim mercenaries, and carved out countless footholds in the mountains and forests. They do not vanish like goblins into the dark. They dig in, they fortify, and they wait. To face hobgoblins is to face not just an enemy, but an army. A machine of war built from flesh and fear, doctrine and discipline. And while the tribes may rise and fall, their creed endures, a drumbeat echoing through every campaign. Hold the line, strengthen the perimeter, conquer or die. I'm Jimmy, your local game master, and thank you for joining me as we delved into the lore of hobgoblins. Until the next one.